Good morning, everybody. Here from the Temple of Silence in Finland and in the United States. I know we have late hours for some and possible hours for others. And in South America, well, it's the middle of the night. But in Australia and New Zealand, I think we're going to do fine. So we're on our 87th program. Uh, Michael was telling me, and our 27th reading through the book. This is actually it's not an easy book, and it requires a lot of discrimination. But I think that's one of the best ways we can operate now. You know, when we have these webinars that are based on the material in a certain book, I think we should read the book along with it, and that will also give some real substance to what we are doing. So that's taking place, as I said, with the reappearance of the Christ, and it's taking place with the glamour. And I think I told you, or maybe told you, that I had just finished the rules for magic on the astral plane. So there are 59 programs there for that one, and earlier 50 programs for the mental plane and the introduction. And I'll get onto the etheric plane as soon as as soon as I possibly can. But the book is pretty well, we're mostly through a treatise on white magic, and it's a wonderful book, and you can go to it on YouTube, Moria Federation Esoteric Education. You can find the playlists, at least for the astral plane. And if you want the introduction and the mental plane, which is maybe the place to begin, you go to Makara, www.makara.us. And so pretty soon we'll be releasing a list of all the commentaries and webinars that are available to you if you would like to study the matter more deeply. For those of you who are in the Moria Federation, it's certainly a strong recommendation, but actually I have to recommend it strongly to all of us. We are never going to assimilate all that is in these wonderful books, but at the same time, we can come a lot closer during these 7 years preceding the conclave of the year 2025, the hierarchical and even shambolic conclave. So we have our work cut out for us for sure. Well, let's oh, yes, and I just want to say that in the chats, in the chat box, I've, okay, well, here is Olivia's Death and Dying Well, which we continue to recommend. It's a new video, and I found it very uplifting. And so where you can go to find it is there. Also, there's going to be coming now 9 programs, just to kind of let you know, that come from the conference when a few of us, Elena Dramcini, Tuya Robbins, and Francis Donald and myself were discussing the higher rays of the individual, the triadal rays and the monadic rays. And this is going to be put on YouTube and probably also on Makara. And I think you will find some types of thought which you may not have entertained before, because, you know, DK pretty well, and rightfully so, concentrated on the rays of the soul and of the personality. But implicit in that presentation is the fact that the ray science goes very, very high. And also in the human energy system, very, very high. And these higher rays, and maybe how to detect them, are discussed in our 9 programs. I mean, I guess our 2-day seminar worked out to about 9 1-hour programs. And on Makara, you can find a book that I've written, which is an ebook, which is called On the Monad. And I deal with the rays of the monad and so forth. You might find it of interest. All right, well, those are my little announcements, as well as, let us say that, and I've also put these in the chat box, that coming up is the equinox in Libra, and that's going to be at, well, we're going to be at 12:35 a.m. GMT on Sunday morning, for those of you who can do it. And then the pre-full moon webinar is coming up on the same day, the 23rd, at 8 o'clock in the evening GMT. And then the full moon in Libra, I forget what I said about that, but it's coming up on the early morning of the 25th. And I think it's here. We start about 1:30 a.m. GMT. So for America, it'll be fine, some of those starting points, and for people in Europe, not so easy maybe, and for Australia, I think okay, and New Zealand okay. But make the sacrifice. In the old days, I used to think it was unusual to see exact full moon groups. I remember traveling with some of my friends at 2 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles to arrive at an exact moment full moon group. And I said, well, this person is really dedicated. And there's just something about it. At the exact moment of the full moon, DK says a door opens, which otherwise is closed. So let's take advantage of it. All right. Hope you got all that. Now, just a brief alignment. And we have come together in order to provide an instrument working under hierarchical methods to help clarify the astral plane of glamour and to a certain extent to understand what illusion is and try to use the intuition to dispel that, though glamour is the greater problem at the moment when you consider the world situation. And we intend to work with consistency and persistently. And some of you will want to start your own glamour dissipation groups in the place where you are. And maybe you can meet in person to do that on a weekly basis. But remember that our own individual glamours, hiding so often as they do, have to be dealt with simultaneously. Otherwise, we can't very much work on a global basis. And so we'll just sound the Om, having prepared in our attitude to do the study work and the more practical meditative work. Oh. Okay. Now, we've been dealing with the glamour of authority. Um, this is interesting because people are very happy to give up the authority of a dogmatic teacher or someone who, like Bucyrus in the Gemini labor of Hercules, is sort of keeping you, as it were, chained to the altar. That's how it was for Hercules. And he was the slave of Bucyrus and of Bucyrus's teaching for a long time, maybe almost the whole incarnation. But finally, he awoke to the situation and rebelled and went off on his own, but not before chaining Bucyrus to his own altar. But there comes a danger point there, as we have been studying, where a person brooks no authority whatsoever and considers himself to be alone in the pursuit of the spiritual path. And that is why in our study of the rules of the road now, which we have done for 2 sessions, we keep on hearing that statement, he travels not alone, he knows he travels not alone. So we have to give up a lower set of allegiances for a higher. And there are laws that simply have to be obeyed. And there are rules to traveling the road with others. And to them we must acquiesce, not thinking that we are a law unto ourselves. Ultimately it's true, but then you have to discover what the self is. And the self is not the personality. So we don't let our individualism dictate what we do, but always the group good. And if we ever become a law unto ourselves, it has to be in the higher sense, because the one and only self has to be understood. So we worked on that, and there was as I've told you, a student who was an artist, and she had a 7th ray soul and a 1st ray personality. Therein lay the trouble, probably a 4th ray mind, and she succumbed, as I mentioned, to the glamour of the independent soul. Well, there is apparently no such thing. The soul is group conscious and always aware of the welfare of the group moving forward. So it's kind of a 1st ray glamour in a way, and we all have the danger of passing through it. And eventually, like the Christ, we have to acquiesce to a higher set of laws, which will align us with the will, the spiritual will, and eventually the will of Sanat Kumara and the planetary logos. Sanat Kumara being kind of a emanation of our planetary logos. Now that leads us to something similar in the world of illusion. Maybe illusion is less of a problem for the majority of human beings at this time, because they are not really mentally focused and certainly not mentally polarized, which occurs between the 2nd and the 3rd initiation. So let's read about this illusion of power, because it does, however, apply to disciples. It applies to those who are really making progress on the spiritual path, and that's when the illusion sets in. It's simply a condition of incorrect interpretation, wrong thought, misjudgment. It's occurring on the mental plane to a great extent, but it can descend into the astral plane and have astral matter attached to it, and it becomes blinding, and in that case, it becomes a glamour as well. So let's now take notes, see what's interesting to you. And also, as I said before, when we reach our section of discussion or questioning, it really can be on anything, but it's also good when it's on something we've studied, something we have studied. Right. Okay, excuse me, a little drink of water here. All right, the illusion of power is perhaps one of the first and most serious tests which comes to an aspirant. It is also one of the best example of this great mistake. We do make real mistakes in thought and in self-perception. And as we succeed in our work, we tend to emphasize the little self that seems to be succeeding, and we lose the track. Okay, it's also one of the best examples of this great mistake, and I therefore bring it to your attention as being one against which I beg you most carefully to guard yourself. Now, he doesn't, occasionally he uses I beg, I implore, he really means it. So that's, for the master to use a word like that, it must be important. Now, note the following. It is rare indeed for any disciple to escape the effects of this error of illusion, this illusion of power. For it is curiously based upon right success and right motive. See, some kind of success precedes it, but then one lets down one's guard and falls into a difficulty. Hence the specious nature of the problem. When something is specious, it is attractive, it seems to be right, but it's not really right. Something within it is actually incorrect. So it's falsely attractive, and some other motive is hiding in there behind the pleasant appearance. All right, so let's go through this idea of how an aspirant, and we're all aspirants, even the Christ in his own way is an aspirant. Technically, a true aspirant has taken the first initiation, and we're always an aspirant to something, something higher. An aspirant succeeds in contacting his soul or ego through right effort. So, is this true of us? It's not so much the masters that we have to contact first. And many people have a big error there. They want to talk to the master before they have that real flowing rapport with the angel of the presence, with the angel which is informing their causal body, their egoic lotus. So anyway, through right methods, the aspirant is succeeding in contacting the soul or ego. Even when he writes ego with a little e, he almost always means the soul. It's not like it's used in psychology today. Through meditation, good intention, and correct technique, that's like the 1, 2, 3 of it in terms of the rays, plus the desire to serve and love, he achieves alignment. Now, this is what we all want. In a way, alignment is the beginning and it's the end. He becomes then aware of the results of his successful work. His mind is illumined. Okay, so, that's the mind in the light of the soul. It's supposed to be held steady. Maybe it's a now and then thing for most of us, but we do get soul light into the mind. Now, here's what happens. A sense of power flows through his vehicles. It's an integrated situation, and integration means power. Because when we are in a fragmented, disintegrated state, there's all kinds of waste of energy going on, leaks and problems with retaining the coherence of our energy. So this sense of power flows through his vehicles. He is temporarily, at least, notice those words, temporarily made aware of the plan, or as much of the plan as he can possibly deal with. The need of the world and the capacity of the soul to meet that need flood his consciousness. His dedication, consecration, and right purpose enhance the directed inflow of spiritual energy. So, we would say, okay, that's our link. That's not what we want. Spiritual energy is really flowing in. That is the story at this stage of his progress. So this is success. But you have to be ever watchful on the path of occultism. Excuse me. You have to be ever watchful, because to have succeeded for a moment or a short period of time is not to have succeeded in the long run, not necessarily. He loves, he seeks to serve, and does all three. He knows, he loves, he seeks to serve. He does all three more or less successfully. And maybe people like ourselves find ourselves in that kind of situation. The result of all this is that he becomes more engrossed with a sense of power. Okay, now there's the problem. It is power, but his attitude towards it, that's the question. He becomes engrossed. Now that means his consciousness descends into this sense of power. And with the part he is to play in aiding humanity, more engrossed with those things than he is with the realization of a due and proper sense of proportion and of spiritual values. Now, let's just say, I want to say it this way, astrologically, he loses his Libra. He loses that sense of proportion and realization of true spiritual values. And he becomes, now, if I can put it this way, he becomes spiritually self-important. And we've all seen it, and maybe we've suffered from it. It's always easier to see in the other person than it is in ourselves. But it's based on success. Nevertheless, there's a fall because we start loving the sense of power more than what the power can really do. He overestimates his experience and himself. Now, right there is a movement against what Libra provides. Libra provides a just estimation of how things really are. And when you compare things, you don't exaggerate, you don't minimize, because when you exaggerate and minimize, it's not truth anymore, and it descends into glamour, or in this case, possibly illusion. He overestimates his experience and himself. Now, this is what we're supposed to do and don't do. Instead of redoubling his efforts and thus establishing a closer contact with the kingdom of souls and loving all beings more deeply, what does he do? He begins to call attention to himself, to the mission he is to develop, and to the confidence that the master and even the planetary logos apparently have in him. See, and all of this is the result of actual success. Illumination has come, a sense of the plan, right motive, and all that, but the sense of power becomes engrossing. He talks about himself. He gestures and attracts notice, demanding recognition. You know, he does things that call attention to himself as his little self. We've seen that too. And as he does so, his alignment is steadily impaired. His contact lessens, and he joins the ranks of the many who have succumbed to the illusion of sensed power. Now, just for a moment, search yourself out. You know, I'm sure among us, we've had some successes and we've been empowered, and maybe we've grown in our estimation as a server. Is any of this true of us? Let's just pause for a moment. Well, you know, it's something that will have to be, like all personal difficulties, it has to be searched out over time through honest self-observation. This form of illusion is becoming increasingly prevalent among disciples and those who have taken the first two initiations. He almost seems to suggest that you can take the first two initiations without really being a disciple. But on the other hand, maybe he's talking about discipleship as preliminary to taking the first and second initiations. These terms have to be regarded as fluid. When do you become a real disciple anyway? Is it when you take the first degree? Is it before that time? Is it when you become finally an accepted disciple on the periphery of the master's ashram? There are varying perspectives here. But anyway, disciples, you know, they're becoming more and more integrated, and integration is power. And they follow the rules and they get the light. But they can't sustain it. They get fascinated by what they get rather than find the way to use what they get in the best possible way for the group. There are today, he says, many people in the world who have taken the first initiation in a previous life. Now, he did say that the book Esoteric Psychology, I guess in both volumes, was written for initiates of the first degree. So, you know, he's probably looking at his students and he's saying, well, the majority of readers of these two books and those who really stick with it and who are really interested in it have probably taken the first degree. So maybe in a previous life. At some period in the present life cycle, recurring and recapitulating as it does the events in an earlier development, they again reach the point of realization which they earlier reached. Has that happened to you? Has that happened to me? Has there been a recapitulation? Have we recognized it when it comes, so that even if we did not take or do not take that initiation in this life, we recognize having taken it and having reached the point that that initiation brought us to? But anyway, the achievement is somehow felt, the achievement of a previous life. So they reached that point of realization which they earlier reached. The significance, now this is important, the significance of their attainment pours in upon them, and the sense of their responsibility and their knowledge. Okay, all good things. They have attained. Knowledge is power. They want to use the power in a responsible manner. So they are filled with this kind of realization of attainment. I'll just put that down. Filled with a knowledge of the realization. Sorry. I have a jumping cursor of attainment. Again, here we go. Again, they overestimate themselves regarding their missions and themselves as unique among the sons of men. Okay, they forget. They travel not alone. I know I can look back at my life and I can find times when I did exactly this. And I was so filled with a sense of what could be done, that I forgot that there's a whole lot of people doing the same thing, or, something parallel. So the rules of the road are always reminding us he travels not alone. There's a whole journey to the east, we might call it, in the words of that book by the German author Hermann Hesse. It's a very spiritual book. But we forget it. And again, we get filled with the sense of what's coming to us because it's new, it's powerful, and it blinds us to how much more there is. So they overestimate themselves again regarding their missions and themselves as unique among the sons of men, and their esoteric and subjective demand for recognition enters in and spoils what might otherwise have been a fruitful service. Now, interesting. Two kinds of demand for recognition. Now, if we go to Rule 11, like some of us in the Morning Federation, we study that, and in the faculty and all that. So you go to Rule 11 and you find out you have to have certain destructions and eliminations before you can even think about applying Rule 11 to your group. You have to break the sentimentality. You have to cut the strictly personal ties with your group members. Number 3 is you eliminate all desire for outer or subjective recognition. And then occult silence. You have to learn what that is. So anyway, they have this esoteric or subjective demand for recognition. The master, fellow disciple, someone. It enters in, and here's the sad part, it spoils what otherwise might have been a fruitful service. So the minute we start thinking about ourselves here and our own status and our own position and our own power and, the uniqueness of it and all that, we're in trouble. Any emphasis upon the personality can distort most easily the pure light of the soul as it seeks to pour through the lower self. Now think about that. Take our eyes off our little personal self. That's the requirement. Think about it. Any emphasis upon the personality can distort most easily the pure light of the soul as it seeks to pour through the lower self. I remember, sometimes people who study this teaching, they determine that they cannot use the word I. I mean, it's just crazy because it's how you use the word I and what you mean that counts. But they get themselves all twisted in a knot trying to avoid using the word I, as if that really meant that they somehow are taking their eyes off their personality. What it really means is their eyes are entirely on their personality as they try to avoid using that word. So, let's say aspirants and disciples fall into many traps, and the question is, what are the traps? And can we recognize that when it's happening to us, we step back and do not allow that mode of thought or action to continue? Okay, so anyway, going on a little bit anyway, any effort to call attention to the mission or task which the personality has undertaken detract. Wait a second. We've got some extra sound going on there, and we don't need it. Okay, make sure you're on mute, otherwise we're going to hear stuff. Okay, so so if we call attention to the mission and to the personality who's doing it, we handicap the mission and we handicap the task. Now, what happens is it leads to a delay, a deferring of the fulfillment of the mission of the task until such a time as the disciple, and here's the point, until such a time as the disciple can be nothing but a channel through which love can pour and light can shine. Now think about that for a moment. Are we a channel? Have we succeeded in being a pure, transparent channel through which love can pour and light can shine? Just a moment to ponder that. So you're just an instrument, No self-importance here. Not I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I get we all fall into it, but whatever that higher energy is, it comes through in an undistorted manner. This pouring through and shining forth has to be a spontaneous happening and contain no self-reference. Unless, of course, sometimes I'm making an excuse for myself now, okay? Sometimes a story here and there can drive the point home. As DK himself, now I'm making an excuse, as DK himself tells us stories from his life to emphasize a lesson. And some pretty tough lessons he went through, as probably we all do, when we recollect one day our chain of lives and what led us through thick and thin and through success and failure to become as we are now. So we've looked now at two illustrations of glamour and illusion, the glamour of one's own authority and the illusion of power. And these two illustrations will show you not only the subtlety of the problem, but the urgent need for its recognition. I mean, sometimes, when you think about what goes on in the public discourse and in the realm of politics and economics and, all those things that are out there in front of us, it's a long way from the people involved seeing the subtlety of what they are doing and catching themselves and trying to stop it. It's still a long way. There are today so many manifesting these two qualities of the lower nature. All right, so that takes us to where we're going to be for today's reading. Now I realize, we're not speeding through this, right? But that's okay because it is subtle and it's not easy to perceive these things. So let's see where we are here. I just want to fill this in, and then I'd like to hear from you and see what you think, what's important, to you based on this. So this was number 87 and reading number 27. And today is the 21st. We're getting near that autumn equinox. And we're going to begin next time on number 88. And it will be here, number 28. And again, it'll be the 28th of September. And I don't know what page we're on. Looks like page 53. Yeah. All right. Well, just a couple of pages, but hopefully we're thinking about it. All right, friends. So that'll be the next time. And meanwhile, let's take your thoughts and your questions. Okay, Vera and okay, wait a second. Attendee is muted by an organizer. Click. Yep, you're good.
Yeah, good. Yes, about the glamour of power and recognition and initiation. Okay, it seems to me like we have to make some mistake one way or another. It's just part of the process. And I'm looking at the example of, say, Winston Churchill. And if I understand rightly, he was a third initiate.
Well, it's hard to say, but let's just say if he was instrumental in saving Western civilization, it's a pretty responsible role. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so in one of your commentaries, you said that at the third initiation, the third eye is open. And when I was listening to it, I thought, what about that Winston Churchill? Because he was in the politics. That's a very tough job. Was he aware about the subtleties of what level of evolution he was? Because my reasoning is he was acting it. He wasn't doing probably too much navel gazing and psychologizing, but he knew what he had to do.
Yeah.
So, can you comment?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. We're told that some very high souls, even with their flaws, relinquish their knowledge of the hierarchy or of spiritual things in order to get the job done. So I think he was one of those who, he had his flaws. So did Ataturk. Ataturk was a bit of a alcoholic and a womanizer, and DK said, well, except for a few minor personal flaws, he really handled the Shambhala energy. So the perspective that they have is different. So if Churchill drank a fifth of bourbon before noon, okay, it's just a minor flaw. He so much went through him what did they? He used to talk about the black dog. You may remember the
Yes.
black dog of depression, because he just realized that if this battle of Britain was not won, that the Nazis would run over everything. And sometimes it was a very discouraging moment. But I don't think he was, he was a first-rate type. I think a first-rate soul, fourth-rate personality. Uh, I'm not sure about the mental ray. There's a lot of fourth ray in it. A combination of 1 and 4 very strongly, and the sixth ray in the astral body and so forth. So he knew what he had to do, as you say. But he's not a navel gazer, and he's not into occultism per se. He was an artist, as you know, and
yes.
and later he let's see what he won, was it a Pulitzer Prize for his sixth volume? Was it sixth volume, something like that? The History of the English Speaking People. I mean, what a huge identification and a great thought. In other words, he was in that level of the third degree where he could see things in a very, very broad way, and he was acknowledged for it later. So he's a great exemplar, but he doesn't have to go through all the lingo that we do. We have a different approach. We're trying to work with conscious esoteric occultism, and his task was different and far more important, really, at the time. Same with FDR, that great disciple, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had his faults, no question about it. But such courage through oratory. These people somehow were able to capture the spirit of the nations they represented and of the free world. So they knew what they had to do, and they didn't have to get involved in our kinds of things. But we have a specialized work, and that specialized work, just like the hierarchies, one day will blossom, and we will contribute very powerfully to things working out correctly on the physical plane. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Thank you.
I just made a little bit of, I admire those two individuals so much. And when I see people playing them down, and people of no significant accomplishment who would just be crushed in the position that these two people took, I just have to, I have to just shake my head. Remember what he said, that the Great War in Atlantis, which occurred about 4 million years ago, the main characters in that were the same in the Second World War. Isn't that interesting? They were brought onto a higher turn of the spiral, and they're fighting the same old battle between the dweller of humanity and his higher possibilities. So when you think of Churchill and Roosevelt in that role, it really widens the whole consideration. And Hitler too, for that matter, on the other side. Yeah, okay, thank you, Vera. It's fascinating stuff. One day, when we can be impersonal about it, we will be in a position to study reincarnationally the succession of development of various figures in the world, either for good or for ill, because he also told us that the members of the Nazi group had for lives indulged in selfishness, which led them to their availability for the Black Lodge, okay? So, but the more important thing is, like the Buddha, have you ever run into that poem, a long poem by Sir Edwin Arnold called The Light of Asia? It's a story about the Buddha in poetry. It's about a poem that's 100 pages long and very, very beautiful. But when he sat under the Bodhi tree, he saw the chain of his lives and where he had failed and where he had succeeded and what led to his present situation. And for any of us, that's the most important thing before we go reading the lives of someone else. So, in the new schools, we will be given the techniques for accurately remembering past lives, which is important for disciples of a certain, developmental stage. So look ahead, and we'll all, prepare ourselves now for what comes later. Thank you. Okay. Other thoughts? Does anybody? I'm just trying to. Okay, Tuya. Okay. Okay. Wait a second, dear. Hold on. Self-muted. Self-muted, dear. You're muted. You got to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry because I am on my mobile and I am on my computer. Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
So is it, do you hear me well?
Very well, actually.
Okay. So this is very interesting question, the whole thing about power and how do we define that for ourselves? Because I have been sometimes realizing that how we mix the power and the strength.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Maybe they are, I don't know, in your words, we define that in Finnish, so they do mean different things, but do they mean also in English, power and strength? They are different things, are they?
It could be because the application, the presence of strength does not necessarily mean it will be applied as power correctly. So strength is the first prerequisite. You have to have enough in you to apply it as power. At least that's my, power has a lot of directed will in it, and strength is a condition within the energy system which allows you to sustain the application of power. That's how I see it anyway.
So you were talking about in the beginning about the labors of Hercules and Busiris, but in labors of Hercules there are two chaining. So there is Busiris, which is chaining, and then there is Prometheus, who is chained. Prometheus, did you want to say something?
No. I'm just listening. Go ahead.
Yeah, Prometheus, which is the solar angel who has been chained in one sense by the gods, and we can think about by law. And thinking about that, and law being also something which is related always to authority, the law, the earthly laws which are giving us permission to have some place in society. When we think about politics, which Vera was pointing out, and which is the area where we have to think about that those people have to use the power and they have to use the authority in order to learn, surely, and in order to make the society and humanity move forward using that kind of power and authority in lawmaking. So in these two things, I have been pondering this a lot because I consider that I have the first ray soul, and it is constantly in my life in the way or in other. And these two ways of being chained, that there is also, when we think about Busiris, and it's not only the physical teacher, but it's all kinds of our thought forms which is binding us. Also in relationship to authority, how much there is hatred towards those people, politicians, who, wherever they are in their own evolution, but the hatred which is somehow accepted, that can be turned towards those people who are on the first ray line. And it is also, it's not only that way that it's going to bind these people in chaining them in subtler ways, because the hatred addressed to them. Of course, we know that whenever we have love in us, it's not going to influence us, but yet these kind of negative attitude is chaining, and then it is chaining also the people who are sending the hatred, who lives in their thought forms in that hatred. So Bucyrus can be all kinds of things, and in relationship to authority. So it's something what I have been seeing, that it's so much related to the moon chain, that there is something about people's the elemental life, which is somehow, it cannot help itself. It is just searching where is power. It goes towards the power. And when you think about the earlier solar system, it was about third ray, and it has always connection to the Father. So it is about power and authority. And then the other kind of chain, what we see in Prometheus, we can say that it is the solar angel in the very deep sense, but then it's the soul infused part in us, which is binding to the responsibilities. And one cannot move out from that. And the authority in that sense is like it has to fade from the structure what we in human life built. Because when we think, yes, when we think about authority, it is always also the structure in our thought forms. Who is powerful? Who has the authority? If the folks or the mass would not give that permission to have that authority, there can be, when we think about Gemini labor, there is Nereus, the teacher who appears in the form of that Hercules is not recognizing. So it is always related to the masses, how the masses give the permission to some kind of status, and that can be used then, and then one uses also authority.
The thing about Prometheus is very interesting, because the element of sacrifice is involved in the chaining. See, when it comes to what's his name, Bucyrus, there's no sacrifice. He's sacrificing nothing. He just But Prometheus is in a way, well, self-chained, or the planetary logos has chained until the task is done. And so it's so interesting that the man, Hercules, the soul, has to become like the solar angel. And in liberating, he does. He liberates the solar angel, Prometheus, the fire bearer, to return to his place, and then he takes over. And we know that that's the fourth initiation. So it's two different kinds of chaining, you might say. I mean, look, we're all chained. Until we take the fourth degree, we're all in chains, really.
So I still continue about this, about the moon chain and the earth chainers. And I have been finding a lot of also that how there's a certain types who are always leaning to others, like giving the authority to others, and yet all the time complaining about that. And I think that is very much which is found in earth chain, that there's like two movements in people, and it's very much related to this Gemini labor. It's very interesting labor, because it tells about us humans, and then in the third part where the Bucyrus comes, and I mean Prometheus, then Hercules learns to serve. And in that sense, I am thinking about, and DK was talking also about that, when we talk about real authority, it cannot be reached without serving.
That's a good point.
So the real authority is always bound, and that we see in Prometheus. Then Hercules comes and helps him.
Yes.
Helps the soul.
It's a very good point. By the way, the Prometheus thing is the fourth encounter, because he's got to, what does he got to do? What did you say? Nereus is first, and then, Antaeus.
Right. You're correct. That is the fourth.
He's the beginning of that serpent of glamour, the Hydra. He's the beginning, and then
that's right.
And then Bucyrus, and the last two is where Hercules really learns. And there is authority. Authority does exist, and it doesn't have to be a glamour, but it has to be an earned authority which is selfless. In other words, it comes out of the Bible. Let him who would be first among you be your servant. Something like that. That statement. And a lot of people want to be first among just to control you rather than serve you. So that's not legitimate. But I'm not.
And we can.
Yeah.
Yes, and we can continue then the last part, the fifth one, the Atlas, when he finds himself willingly under the rock, under the huge.
Like hierarchy.
Right.
He becomes a member of hierarchy, and he upholds the world. So it's a wonderful labor. It's wonderful. And we're very fortunate, in that book, the Tibetan wrote 7 of the stories, but Alice Bailey never got to comment on number 7. But for the first 6 of them, including Gemini, the Tibetan wrote it, and Alice Bailey offered her commentary. So we get a very clear and beautiful example of what never could be achieved in the last several of the stories when other people are doing it, So this is really a good one. And remember how many people are Gemini that are serving in the Tibetan's group. He himself has a huge Gemini as the servant of the messenger of the masters, and Alice Bailey, Gemini, Mary Bailey, Gemini, Foster Bailey, Gemini rising. This other woman, she had Gemini rising too, or sun in Gemini, whatever. So Gemini is a big thing about the teaching of the ageless wisdom. And of course, the 2 selves and all that. So, all right, good. Thank you, Tuya. This question of power and strength, it is real. It's not always false. It's not always egoistic. It can be earned, but we fall into traps along the way because we are still not independent of our personality identification. Okay, good. Now let's see.
Michael?
Yes.
Yes, several questions from Anne.
Got it. Thank you, Michael. Okay, the date and time for the pre-full moon, please. And please do a webinar on the eyes, and I will make a compilation on the eyes of Master Hilarion and Master Mori as soon as I can, if you think it would help. Okay, very interesting. Yes, obviously you feel something in it, Anne, so I'm sure that it can help. Now, because, these are, what do they do? It's kind of interesting. I've been told, or the teaching tells us, that when a master creates a Maya Virupa, or even someone beyond the master stage, they generally choose the form in which they took the 5th initiation. So maybe the forms that we see, which are not naturally born forms, but are Maya Virupas, are reflections of what the individual looked like when the individual took the 5th initiation. Now, Master DK still has the old form. We don't know if he's exchanged that or not. So there can be modification, but oftentimes, as I recall, that 5th initiation form is very important. So it'll be interesting for people who are artistic or study deeply the form of man to see what they see. Now, let's see about the pre-full moon. Yes, on the 23rd, which is Sunday, at 8 o'clock GMT, we will have the pre-full moon in Libra. Now, before that, on the same day, Tuya is doing the equinox, Liber Equinox, and that is at 12:35 a.m. GMT, 3:35 a.m. here in Finland, and about an hour and 20 minutes later, we have the exact moment of the equinox, and then the full moon is coming in on the 25th, again, very early in the morning here, but it should be better for you in the United States and possible for you who are in Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. Now, what is the symbolizing? I had an old teacher, and he was an occultist, and he was a Masonic Rosicrucian occultist, and he was the real thing. So what is the symbolism behind the birds eating the liver of Prometheus? And it has to do with the sacred pains, which Moria talks about all the time, which are experienced by the advancing individual within his organic system. Of course, the liver is a first-rate organ, and it's, very involved in many things medically that I'm not sure of, but I know how important it is. It's a great synthesizing, generating organ. And apparently, when you are going through the process of transformation, the fiery pains feel like there's an eagle or someone like that pecking at your liver and at other organs. So we all have to get ready. Master Moria said, he talked about the nun, a spirit, a woman who has taken the vows and all that. And he says, the nun is moaning, I burn, I burn. And he says, this is a real thing. She really is on fire, and the pain is excruciating. We remember that Krishnamurti was being trained at a certain point to be a kind of instrument for the Christ. And he went through for a few years. Now, Philip Lindsay, he knows more about this because he's done this biography on the initiations of Krishnamurti. But anyway, he went through excruciating pain in the tuning up process. So his soul was infusing him, and the pain in the system was very great, and it had to be endured. So I think that also goes with the Kundalini as well. Some may have experienced it here and there. It has to do, in my view, Anne, with the sacred pains, which are unavoidable in the person who is really going to become a very refined instrument for the higher energies. Okay, in the mythology of Greece. So that's how I see it. And that's what my old teacher used to tell me, that, his heart was burning, his liver was burning. He was close to 80 years old, and he just went through it, and the fire was purifying him, and that it's like a firebird, if I may say, ripping away at the normal feeling within your body. That's my take on it at the moment. I'm sure there's more about the liver that I don't know about, but the liver is the main thing. Okay, anything? Yes, okay, I think Tuija knows something here. Go ahead, dear. Self-muted. There you go.
Yeah, yes, when we study this whole labors of Hercules and Gemini, you see the relationship. And I think here Tibetan is giving us a very deep hint between Gemini and Capricorn. So that the symbolism, when you think about the being binded and chained, and Prometheus is chained in the rock, on the rock. So the rock and the matter earth is related to Capricorn. And he talks about this relationship somewhere about the Gemini and Capricorn, the initiation process. I think here is the hint of the third degree, and how I think that the liver has to be some kind of key point in the organs when we as humans starts to transform ourselves into the different pranic line. So before the decree, we are taking prana from the prana of the earth, from the aura of the earth. It is circulated in the aura of the earth, and we take from that. But when we become the solar beings, in the solar initiations, the decree on, I think we start to take prana directly from the sun. And Akira, the eagle who is pecking on
the sun eagle.
The liver.
The
sun eagle is pecking the liver, some kind of thing symbolizing about that, how we go through the process in order to transfigure ourselves.
And you know, there's one thing that, let me insert, we don't know how the solar angel itself suffers in the process. See, in other words,
the suffering will be about that, because as I was pointing earlier about these lines of moon chain and earth chain, so there's something about the mystery related to the elemental life, that our bodies have to be built from some kind of matter, and this matter has to be defined, the matter has to be transformed and uplifted, purified, but this is painful. It's a growing process in very physical ways, as all of us who remember our time when we were growing physically, and we had those pains of growth in our legs or somewhere in the body. So that is what I'm understanding also in our inner bodies. It's a painful process, and the quicker it is, the more painful it is. But I think here it is hinting about that, how important liver is for that process of transfiguration.
Yeah, it's a huge synthesizing organ. And, you know, it's not only that the disciple is suffering as the soul infusion process occurs, because it's really going to burn, but the solar angel itself in descending into the material, because Prometheus is the fire bearer, you know, he is the solar angel. He is suffering too in ways that are occultly related to the liver. Because believe it or not, a solar angel has a head, has a heart, has a head. In other words, the anatomy of the solar angel is sometimes hinted at. So who knows what else is involved occultly?
You know,
in the energy system. Yeah, go ahead.
The symbolism of the peacock. What is this bird who has the
peacock?
Not peacock. Who is eating also the heart and gives from the
pelican. The
same idea, because the liver and heart are related, and the liver, if we use the lower emotions, the fire of the liver can burn the heart.
Yes. Look, we're gonna learn about this. I have a feeling that some of these medical things are going to be delivered by Master Decay in his next books. I just feel that these practical issues of energy, occultism, and the organs, I think they're going to appear for us. So anyway, it's an interesting subject. It's obviously, pretty deep, and has to do with our whole relationship with that host of fire bearers. And what's so interesting is that the gods got angry at the solar angels. I mean, not really, for stealing the sacred fire and giving it to man. And so you steal the sacred fire, you have to stay in the rock and see it through so man gets the sacred fire. And only then can you be released. Very interesting mythology. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's it, Anne, in terms of what it looks like, at least to us. Okay, now, other questions or statements? We're reaching the point where we can have our little meditation. Is there anything else from group members that you would like to say or ask?
I am seeing no other hands or questions.
Okay, Michael. Right, I don't see it right now. Okay, very good then. Okay, well, look, the glamour of authority and the illusion of power. He's telling us what we probably all will go through or are going through, and maybe we've also, to a degree, left it behind if we have true humility, which is an adjusted sense of right proportion. So there's this energy of Libra, which is one of the major Christ energies, is so important so that we can see life truly and not get into those exaggerations and minimizations which make it impossible for us to function in line with the divine plan. So we'll find a lot of wonderful things here. I sometimes think, okay, not really easy to understand, but we'll go through. We'll be careful. We'll take it week by week when we can, and persist with the study until we can really be useful in helping to eliminate the veils, fogs, clouds, distortions, miasmas, and misinterpretations of illusion. Okay, we will persist. All right, thank you. And now let's the next thing we're going to do is have our meditation. Well, there's so many things that are glamorous in the world today. You know, it's this glamour. Look, I tell you, it all starts with the illusion of mistaken identity. What can you do? You're coming up in an ignorant way from the animal state, at least that part of you that has been put down into densified matter. It keeps on drawing the ring past knot in a too circumscribed manner. There's more to the human being, much, much more to the human being than the slowly rising intelligence of humanity thinks there is. So why all the egotism and the lying and the separativeness and, you know, things we've been working on? Why all of that has to do with one of the major mistakes. DK points out a mistake that we all run into. And when I think about it, this one is a major mistake. We think that we are the personality. I just put it in the simplest possible terms. And we don't get behind the instrument and find ourselves as something else, and really find ourselves as something else. Now, it's going to be forced on us when we drop the body. It's just not going to be there, and yet we will be. Then what are we? You know, and if we could only do that in life, if we could drop the body consciousness or put it in its proper place and not make the mistake of identifying as the body, but as identifying as the observer. It's a very occult method, the attitude of the observer, because finally, if you follow that back far enough, it leads you into realizing yourself as the monad, the spirit, the one. There's only one monad in all of cosmos ultimately, and everything else is simply a limitation upon ultimate monadic vision. So if we could just get behind and within the self we ordinarily think we are, which is that personal self. So, and then, of course, if we think we are that self, that personal self, we do everything we can to protect it. And that's where the trouble comes in. It is said that God is no respecter of persons. It's a profound statement, and really the personality is not that important in the long run. But we think it is. And then we do all these things. We act proud. We separate ourselves. We lie to others. We manipulate. We distort. You just look at politics today and you see the perfect example of what can happen when personality is in control and not the soul. The hierarchy wants internationalism, and there's millions of people in the world that are deathly afraid of it because it will take away their sovereignty, using that national term on a more individual level. The hierarchy wants Aquarius, and so many are entering the Leo stage where they're just becoming someone, and they don't want Aquarius. They want what they've got, their ordinary, regular self. So let's today meditate on the glamour of personality and realizing that mistaken identity as the personality is the cause of so many, many problems in our human relations and our national and international relations. Okay, so here we are, a certain number of us, we're coming together, and in the silence, just some silence. So in this silence, we really feel that it is related to synthesis. Silence and synthesis go together, and we feel the coalescing of the group into one being and one consciousness. And this work, let us not underestimate it. It actually is, because it's a major world problem. It's a dangerous work. And those who are feeding the glamour, that gigantic thought form which is hovering over humanity and causing such misery, they don't want us to be doing this. So the work has its dangers, and we need the protective formula. So we're going to make that, divine cross involving the eyes, and as we make the cross, we see it lit up in a protective mode. As a soul, I work in light, and darkness cannot touch me. I take my stand within the light, I work, and from that point, I never move. And that light, that cross, that lighted cross, for every individual and for the group as a whole. Because, people do get touched by the darkness, and they don't even know it. So this keeps us in the light. Now we gather together the three lights. We're familiar with this by now, uplifting the light of matter to the mental plane, and then focusing upon the mental plane, the light of mind, so these two fused together are logical, reasoning, clear mind, and the light of matter to vitalize it, support it. Two lights together. And the light of the soul. From above the head, perhaps, that feeling of where is the soul light, we bring it down. It's of a different quality. Bring it down and fuse it with the other two lights. And three lights are one light. Three are one. And it's all focused in our thinking, reasoning, clarifying mind, generically of the fifth ray. It is the fifth principle. And whatever may be our mental rays, this luminous fifth ray, this beam of clarifying light is what we use, and we say, feeling and visualizing this triple light, the light is one, and in that light shall we see light. This is the light that turns the darkness into day. And then the sacred word. So this is preparation. And then the formula, which outlines what we're going to do together. Radiance and power. Radiance are we, and power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens and the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. Thus, with the light we work and turn the darkness into day. So this searchlight is awakening. Its beam is thrown forth onto the astral plane. It not only reveals where glamour is to be found, but it is a weapon to help dissipate that glamour. So it's as if we all get behind and within that great searchlight. We're working now really with the technique of light. There are other techniques in this book, but this is perhaps the one which is most prominent, relating specifically as it does to glamour rather than to Maya or illusion. Okay. And now to strengthen our beam, as the work before it is demanding, we visualize the descent of the spiritual will through the soul, through the various petals, and through the head center, and finally the base of the spine. And we throw that spiritual will into the beam we're going to use. With power upon its beam, the light is focused on the goal. And our goal is the dissipation of the glamour of personality, so blatant in the world today and destined to become even more problematic, the Tibetan tells us. So we think for a moment, each in his own way, about the personality, what it is, how it looks, what it does, its use, and also what it may prevent of soul expression. So we'll take a few moments to do that, thinking about what we gain and what we lose from personality, and especially what we lose by identifying as the personality. because it is very important that finally, after all of our meditation and study, we do achieve soul identification. And those words are easily spoken. However, it's one of the key ingredients of harmlessness. And harmlessness, as I've been relearning and doing a treatise on white magic, is responsible for avoiding many pitfalls for the aspirant and disciple in the magical process. So, with the personality in mind and its glamour, the glamour of wrong identification in this case, we say the three words of power. The power of our united light prevents the appearance of the glamour of personality. And that, of course, means the growing group consciousness that we will expect in the Aquarian age. The second word of power, the power of our united light negates the quality of the glamour of personality from affecting humanity. We don't want to suffer from that unique blindness which sees the personality as the most important thing. And then the third word of power, the power of our united light destroys the life behind the glamour of personality. Now, using these words of power and our own thought, we will have 5 minutes as we visualize the beam of light penetrating into the glamour, producing its weakening, its dissipation. 5 minutes of silence and intensity of purpose, whilst this work of dissipating the glamour of personality is occurring. 5 minutes. This is such an important, fundamental glamour to deal with. And it basically starts with an illusion. It really is the great mistake. Now, DK gives us a couple of things we can do. First of all, he says, and it's hard, maybe, for many, take your eyes off your lower personal self. And then he says, ask nothing for the lower personal self. We have to check out our desires and see to what extent we are desiring something for the lower personal self. And as we were meditating, I thought of what I've recently been over in a treatise on white magic, and I'll just read it out of these 15 simple rules. And wherever we see the word speak, we can well substitute as well the word think. This is the final rule, or the final wise counsel. Speak not of self, pity not thy fate. The thoughts of self and of thy lower destiny prevent the inner voice of thine own soul from striking upon thine ear. Speak of the soul, enlarge upon the plan. Forget thyself in building for the world. Thus is the law of form offset. Thus can the rule of love enter upon that world. Okay, I think we get the idea. There are great things to think about, great things to speak about, great things to focus on, and the personality is simply an instrument for the expression of higher ideas, which become ideals, and finally tangible expressions in the lower 18 subplanes. So let's get behind as the observer of what we too often think of as ourself. So we pull back and the searchlight is turned off, and we'll reactivate it later. And we go on in our week, doing our best to see things as they are, think clearly, say the right words, which will help, based on the right thoughts, which will help clarify the very mixed up situation in which humanity finds itself. Okay, thank you, friends, for being here. And Olivia, Tuya, and I invite you for the next time, 28th, and when, if for any reason, travels are making the Friday meeting impossible, we'll let you know. It occasionally happens. So all the best to you, lots of love, many blessings, and lots is coming up. Remember, we're continuing with the Ask program in the morning schedule. That's a lot going on. And the equinox is happening on Sunday. The pre-full moon also on Sunday later in the evening. And then the full moon itself very early GMT on Tuesday morning, the 25th. We'll be seeing you, and all the best. And bye for now.